I'm trying to do today is give you a little bit of a sampling of the kind of teaching that we're doing in our nonprofit. So I won't be able to cover everything that I might want to cover, but one of the concepts that I teach leaders is what we call self-differentiated leaders. I'll get the word out here in just a second. A leader, so let me do just a little bit of leadership work, because the nonprofit hangs on the vision and dream of the leader, whoever that might be designated. Now, I realize there might be a board, there might be elders involved here, but often in our churches, it's the pastor that is carrying kind of the vision for what we can do, the difference we can make. If you're going to lead anything, so just turn this into leadership, period. If you're leading anything, you've got to know where you're going, or you're taking people nowhere. You've got to know where you're going. Where is this journey with God taking you that you want other people to follow? And so I spend some energy. In fact, I spend at least a class, at least a morning, in a full day class. Come on in, welcome. I spend at least 20 to 25% of the class on talking about what's involved in being a clearly defined leader, knowing where you're going, that you want other people to follow you. Now, I do not think this is, although it can become, I do not think it is an ego trip for the pastor. I think there's got to be a really strong dynamic thing going on between the pastor and God. If that's not there, who wants to follow them, right?
It's kind of a passion, I should say.
Yeah. It's kind of a passion, but it's also, how do you keep, since everybody that is part of your nonprofit or your church or any other leadership have their own ideas about what ought to happen, how do you stay on track with everybody pulling you to the right, to the left, from the behind, and sometimes in the front? How do you stay self-defined? So I want to spend just a little bit of time today on this notion of a self-differentiated leader. Notice here in the little diagram, all the people pressing up on the leader, and the leader is still standing on his own 2 feet. That's what we're talking about. How can you stand on your own 2 feet? Again, if I was preaching today, we'd talk about making sure you know who you are in Jesus. But we're doing nonprofit stuff, so my goodness, this is sensitive. I may have to step over here and just bring this back and forth.
It should be a self-differentiated. It's differentiated. Self-differentiated leader.
Yeah.
Should be.
Got me. You know what happens on PowerPoint when you capitalize, if you got to check not to check all capital words?
I think in the PowerPoint you don't have a self check, I guess, unless you're in the Word.
Say it again?
If you are typing that in a PowerPoint, I think it's not been captioned to an autocorrect thing. But if you are typing it in a Word, it will self-auto-check.
Yeah. Well, there's actually a check mark available in Word that allows you not to check all capitalized words. So good catch. We'll correct it before it actually gets to you. How that? The kind of thinking that I'm talking about actually comes out of here, let me get out of the way. It actually comes out of the thinking of a couple of theorists on how families actually work. One of the things that I discovered as a leader is that why is it when you get motion, there's always people there pulling you back? Or why is there always somebody, even though everybody's agreed that this is direction that we're going, why is there always somebody that's sabotaging you?
I think it's a part of the work of the enemy.
It could be part of the work of the enemy, but it could also be self-preservation.
Yeah, it
could be.
It could help you as well.
Yeah, it could be a quality that says, let's not go too fast because we might get in trouble if we do that. So I'm giving you here a list of some of the sources I became fascinated with the work of Murray Bowen. Murray was a psychiatrist that lived late 50s, early 60s. In fact, he lived all the way up until 1990. But Murray was the first one to attempt to help schizophrenics. That was his area of expertise. And he devised some therapies that would help a schizophrenic be symptom-free within 2 weeks of therapy. And then he'd send them home. And it only took about 2 weeks for everything to come back. And so Murray began to theorize that maybe we are not, like psychology would teach us, isolated individuals, because that's how basic psychology treats us. If something's wrong, it's got to be something inside of you. What if what was wrong was something between people? What if it lived there instead of just inside somebody? This is not ignoring the fact that there can certainly be brain damage and mental capacities, those kind of things. But what if what's going on happens because people are connected to other people? And so he was one of the first psychiatrists that began to hospitalize entire families if they'd let them, and basically began to study them and how they're interconnected. And what he discovered was that there is a way of thinking about us as a group that could possibly help us understand how people relate. Now, he was also after, he wanted a theory, and again, we're doing science here, not theology this time. Theology is another time. He's trying to think, is there a way to conceive as the way people interact with each other that's always true regardless of ethnicity or other matters? Is there certain always true about us because we're human? Because often what we do is we say people are so-and-so because they're Filipino or because they're Italian, or we use the ethnic paintbrush to basically cover people are like that. And certainly there's certain traits that go with certain people. But what if there was some really baseline ways of thinking about how people are actually hooked together?
I think the laws of Gregor Mendel's of heredity comes to the third generation.
Yeah. Yeah, there is certainly something generational going on. You can watch that in families. Well, anyway, other practitioners include Michael Kerr and Edwin Friedman. You're going to hear me do a lot with Edwin Friedman today because Edwin was a Jewish rabbi who was studying under Murray Bowen. And so he's a Jewish rabbi learning family therapy while also leading a congregation. And he began to observe that everything he was learning about families, by the way, you put together a work team, I can promise you, within a few weeks, they're going to act like family. You're going to be able to tell who the oldest born is. You're going to tell who the baby is. You're going to tell who's not pulling their load and who's overdoing it to pull the load that nobody else is pulling. Just like your kids. So I want to give you 5 basic concepts that I work with. And I do this with congregations. And where this fits in the nonprofit leadership arena, where this actually fits is that you're going to be leading people. So anything that you can learn about people will help you lead. So I want to give you 5 basic concepts. Let's start with, did I get differentiation spelled right here? Bong, did I get it? I got it right here?
Yeah.
Okay, just check. Yeah. You notice my fault. I want you to notice when I do it right too. Let's start with differentiation of self. This is the ability to be a self when everybody else in the group is demanding that you be something else. You know that moment? You're in a meeting, you think you should say something, and then you decide you shouldn't say it because you're wondering how the people around you are going to react. That is you dealing with self-differentiation. A self-differentiated person, that is a person who is able to define themselves. If it needs to be said, we'll say it, regardless of how it hits the other people. Now, this is not an excuse to be mean.
Yeah, there are people like that. A lot of them.
There are people that are just mean. So differentiation of self is the ability to be a self. One of the ways I like to say this is your ability to be me when everybody else is demanding that you be we, that you be like all of us. There is a syndrome's probably too big of a word. There is a phenomenon or an experience called the Abilene effect. It's named after Abilene, Texas, but not probably Dice Air Force Base is, I think, where this comes. But anyway, the Abilene effect is the ability of a board to make a decision as a board that every individual member hates. Did you follow me on that one? A group of people are able to make a decision as a group that every individual in the group dislikes or hates.
Yeah, there are people who can initiate that. Is sowing misinformation happening to everyone.
Yeah, sometimes we call it groupthink.
Yeah.
And that's why we need somebody at our board tables, at our elders meetings, who's willing to say, okay, are we thinking for ourselves, or are we just repeating what everybody else is saying? One of the best tasks that you can do in any of your meetings is make sure that everyone is speaking for themselves and creating the permission that it's okay to disagree, because that, as I tell my team frequently, it doesn't have to be my answer or your answer as long as it's the best answer for the organization. So creating that kind of atmosphere does take some time, because it means that if I've got, I'm in that meeting, I think I should say something, but I'm afraid of how it's going to affect other people. We create meetings in which people can go ahead and say it. Here's what I'm thinking. And so sometimes I will say, okay, nobody's saying anything, but I've got a feeling that some of you are thinking something different. So even if you don't want to say it, what are you thinking? Get it on the table. The stuff that doesn't get on the table can come up and sneak you from behind. In fact, the people who don't say what they're thinking are the people who will resist what the group's trying to do. So it's better to have it on the table so we can work through it at the beginning than to do it later. Okay, differentiation of self. Homeostasis. Every work group, every group seeks to stay on a balance. If you grew up in a dysfunctional family and you learned how to stand with the rest of your siblings like this and it began to feel normal, standing up straight actually feels abnormal. Whatever the balance is that you've gotten used to, there is the desire to keep everything at the same temperature. Thermostat, #1 cause for divorce. Now, this is not scientifically proven.
Oh, I thought it's IKEA.
It's IKEA?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's way more complicated than my illustration.
It would control.
But the thermostat's a good illustration. Is if you come by and it's too cold, you turn it up. If your mate or your roommate comes by and it's too hot, turns it down. Oftentimes when people in church life or community life are reacting, they're just trying to get it to feel the same. One of the things I like to do, I won't do it tomorrow, Bong, I won't do it tomorrow. One of the things I like to do when I'm visiting a church, particularly if we're having these kind of conversations, is I like to find the sacred flower pot or the sacred something. Every church seems to have them. I'm going to use the flower pot, and you guys substitute what it is in your community life. But I like to take the sacred flower pot that the dear sister, who's probably 90-something, has been working on, has been keeping this flower pot for 50 years. Usually it's right in the front of the church. Sometimes it's right in front of the pulpit. I love to take that thing and put it somewhere it ought not to be. In front of the ladies' washroom, in the hallway. And here's what you do. As soon as you take it, you look at your watch, and you begin to count how long it takes for that flower pot to end back up in the sacred place.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. All of our churches are full of people who have certain things that need to happen for them for it to be church. So apply this to other areas of your life. If you take that and you move it somewhere else, they're going to move it back. Is that sabotage? Yes. But it's not malicious. They're just trying to turn the thermostat back to where it belongs. Okay, so we're all leading groups whose basic tendency is to keep things the same. Any of you that's got any leadership in you can feel why this is going to be a bit of a problem? Leaders, let me say it this way, leaders should get in trouble because you're trying to take a group of people who are comfortable and move them to a new place. And so the model I like to use, a good leader knows how to throw the system off balance and then let it balance it out. And you're doing this. It's slower work, but it's more permanent work.
So you think that the leaders in the church having a lot of problems are normal?
I'm saying churches that are growing should have conflict, and they should learn how to process conflict well. How's that?
Right.
Yeah, conflict is not a bad thing, and you have to figure out, one of the things that's helped me, particularly as I've worked on my own ability to define who I am as a leader, is to realize that people are usually not against you. They are for them. They're usually not against you. They don't spend a lot of time obsessing about what you're doing and what you're not doing. Are you spending a lot of time obsessing about what they're doing? Well, then they're not thinking about you either. So we're leading groups that by nature want to stay balanced. Besides, you guys have gone through instability. Perhaps COVID's brought you into instability. If you've had times of instability, you can't live there forever. Some resolution is going to happen.
Could we also say that it is the culture of church governance?
Church governance that models. I'm going to talk about two things. Church governance that models a non-anxious presence will spread that presence throughout the church. If I come to you and you're a church leader, I come to you with a problem and you freak out on me, your freak out's just going to go all over that church. Leaders, don't freak out. It's like the first time you have somebody confess something to you you've never heard before. Do not let your mouth drop. Be curious and say, oh, tell me more. Because if you go, they're not telling you another thing. You just became unsafe. Yeah.
What you're saying is that there are things, say for example in the church, that when you start to shake a little, there are these groups of people who would resist the change.
Yes.
And they just wanted to go back to the thermostat or to the
That's
comfortable level because probably one, they are uninformed. Two, it's too comfortable. Three, like what you said before, there is no direction.
That's
we
right.
We just wanted to exist, but we have no direction.
That's right. And when the church is really anxious, they put those people in charge. Have you ever seen this?
Yep.
Okay. So you can actually, although there's no real scale for it, but you can actually begin to measure this by preaching a controversial sermon, biblical. You know you're right, at least you've done your best to be right. And when people meet you at the door and they say stuff like, I can't believe you said that. Those are among your undifferentiated people. A differentiated person will come to you and say, that was an interesting thought. I don't think I agree with you. Could we talk about it?
Right.
So you can actually begin to use this as a bit of a barometer for who's mature in your organization. Yeah. All right. So homeostasis. Let's go to this one. I'm actually quite surprised at how important this one is. An emotional triangle is when. Bong, you gonna go check the thermostat, are you?
I'm checking for the lunch, so yeah, just go.
Our most rewarding relationships are one-on-one relationships. You guys know this experience when you have coffee with somebody and you have that just really you've got that real sense this person understands me, they get me. The funny thing about one-on-one relationships, including our marriages, is they're actually kind of unstable. It takes real energy to keep them balanced. When a one-on-one relationship becomes conflictual, we will draw in a third party or a third issue to balance that relationship. We call these emotional triangles. They invariably exist throughout the church. In fact, when people get anxious, you can actually watch people beginning to pair off even before church is over and you can almost predict which people it will be. You know, I'm watching you, man. You know.
Yeah, I've been noticing one. So
okay. Yeah. Well, oftentimes, if somebody's upset at the preacher and they're going back, that's a triangle between those two and the preacher. The preacher is the third leg of that triangle. It can be an elder, it can be the CEO, and so this is really good information. And so these emotional triangles, two of the people will be close to each other, one of the persons will be on the outs. Did you follow the dynamic there? Two of the people. In fact, when the conflict ends, the two people who are really close may not be so close anymore. It's almost as if the enemy is keeping them close.
Isn't that the same as the saying that goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend?
Triangle. Yeah. Triangles, again, are pretty natural. In fact, we live in triangles. For example, if you have children, you and the wife disagreeing over how to punish the children, how to raise the children, that can be a triangle. A husband with his job can be a triangle with his wife. He's spending more time with his job than with his wife. In fact, one of the major causes of what I would call empty nest divorces is because the husband's been over-investing in the job, the wife's been over-investing in the kids, and now all of a sudden they have to get to know each other again. That's hard work. Nobody expected it to be hard work, but it is hard work. And so don't be surprised when you see these divorces happen as soon as the kids leave, because it pulled out one leg of the triangle. You guys begin to see that? And so you can actually use triangles. For example, if someone's telling you something about another person, and it's for the purpose of you to view that other person less, you're in a triangle, my friend. There's no reason in the world to tell you information about another that makes you think less of that other.
How would you stop this person?
Okay.
Telling that you can't tell them, oh, you can't do that. It's contagious. It's it creeps in your mind like luring. How would you say it? How would you?
Let's say that you've come to tell me something about Pat. Okay? And we're in the same room that Pat's in. I would say, hey Pat, my friend here's got something to tell you. It'll stop the triangle. Well, actually it won't stop the triangle. It'll stop you from being part of the triangles because you don't play.
Right.
Because you have to play in order to make these things work. When churches become very anxious, when organizations become very anxious, triangles begin to multiply within the church. And this is because people are trying to lower their anxiety. And one of the ways that we lower our anxiety, if you and I aren't getting along, is we grab that other person.
But the problem with some people is they're not very willing actually to come and discuss together the issue, right? So they just leave. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, it can be. But also it can give you a new strategy.
Well, we did a lot of these things in the church, and
Yeah.
People just leave. I mean,
Okay,
Yeah.
self-differentiated. When folks left Jesus, you know what Jesus did, right?
yeah, well,
He let them. I don't like losing people either, but people, we treat people as if they are adults who can make their own decisions. Now, of course, we're not always those people, but we will treat people that way.
Sometimes when you go to this thing, you can try to comparison from your church family to your coworkers.
Mhm.
You feel comfortable with your coworkers because you settle your disagreement right away. In the church, you carry the burden until you go out on that door.
Yeah, one of the challenges in church life is that we tend to be enmeshed, and we can't tell where people begin and where they end. And so an enmeshed church is really hard to sort through because people are used to being in each other's business in ways that are not helpful. Yeah. So let me keep it going. Identify patient. When a church needs a scapegoat, when they need somebody they can blame, let me come at this another direction. If I've been called in to help a church and somebody's pointing at somebody else and saying they're to blame, the person who's doing the pointing is not dealing with their own stuff. The leader is the one in the room not blaming anybody. When a group says, well, we would do that, but we can't do it because of so-and-so, what they're saying is we're not taking responsibility for our part in it because it's their fault. Whenever we do that, we basically step out of our own responsibility. Oh, I'm not responsible for it, Joe is. So we can measure how well a church is doing. If they're blaming certain individuals for their problem and the group's not taking responsibility of it at large. Let me give you an example. We had a church that recently had a minister who had an affair with somebody in the church. Now, obviously we can say this minister really made a mistake.
it's fire.
But the leaders made a move that I was so proud to see. They said, that may be true, but did we do things that allowed the conditions to happen? One could walk away saying the minister did it all, he messed it up. But were there contributing factors? It happened during COVID. Was there a sense of isolation? Did we allow our minister to be isolated in such a way that they didn't have any safety? It's not us saying we're responsible for it, but it's saying when something goes down in the life of the church, we did participate in it. And our participation might have been we didn't speak up when we knew better. Yeah. When a divorce goes down, I know there's lots of talk about what makes an innocent party, who can marry again and all that. I don't know if you guys have wrestled with the divorce text. The fact of the matter is by the time a divorce comes along, two people have made a lot of mistakes. Not one, two people. Now, one person might have done something to end the marriage, but the fact is that we don't get to that point in our relationship without both parties being participants in it. Agree, disagree? I grew up in an abusive household. My father used to beat my mom, and I can assure you from observation, my mom used to set those beatings up. I watched her. She got so used to that being the homeostasis that about every 4 weeks, my mom would goad my dad to that point. She knew his breaking point. I'm not saying my dad is innocent in any regard, but I'm saying I grew up in one of those homes where this thermostat thing, about every 4 weeks, it would happen again, it would happen again, it would happen again. She'd never leave. She'd take her beating, things would get calm again, and it would start over again. So even in situations that are abusive, and there's clearly somebody wrong here, that other party's probably having some participatory action in it. Okay. What I said is totally politically incorrect, but I think it's really how people work. It's my experience of how my family worked. Yeah, somebody else?
Okay. isn't it in psychology they call it codependency?
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, and I think enmeshment, what I'm talking about enmeshment is kind of a codependency, yeah. It's almost as if a self-differentiated person doesn't need, it's nice to have people come alongside, but you don't need people to come alongside. An unself-differentiated person is going to need somebody else to give it strength to be a self. And so they're like, I imagine them, there's a full battery and a half battery, and the half battery is always trying to get juice out of the full battery.
Right.
Yeah. So, one more extended family field. Probably going as long as I can in this. An extended family field is that there's more people at the table than the people that are actually at the table. You ever been in a meeting where somebody exploded beyond the level of whatever you were talking about? It just didn't seem that should upset them. Probably something's going on in their extended family who's not at the table. A death of a relative. A wife telling a husband that she's planning to leave. And so when people explode, when they have emotional explosions over issues that are not so big, it's an insight that something else is here, somebody else is here. I served a church in South Carolina in which we didn't have elders, so we had a men's business meeting. That's kind of how they arranged their life. I can assure you that those three men that kind of made up the core team, their wives were always present at the table, even though they weren't there. It's better to get everybody to speak with their own voice, but the extended family field is the notion that we are connected to people beyond the group that we actually see. And people who leave us sometimes emotionally don't leave us. For example, if we're obsessing over why they've left, emotionally they're still with us. This is true of any of our work settings. While I'm probably more comfortable in a church context because that's where I've served most of my life, this is true of my staff. My staff, they're great people, but sometimes I want to send them to their rooms because they bring the dynamics. When we employ people, they bring the dynamics of their family. They bring their family of origin with them. It's who we are. How many of you guys are still trying to work through kind of stuff that childhood? It's still with you. Certain events bring back certain events. We spend our adult lives trying to figure out who we are based on the family of origin we grew up in.
Part of the learning thing, I guess. Going back to the old days and what you are in the present, how you can maybe improve better or something like that.
Well, I think every work team ought to share their family of origin story. I think we ought to create space where folks can find out, When folks find me with my education at this point, they don't know I grew up in a poor farming community in Oklahoma, because they see what they see now. But those stories are still with me. Obviously, I can talk about my parents as if it just happened yesterday. Still with me. Still a part of my story. Yeah.
We have a joke here that when you see like someone doing those kind of stuff, like bullying or something, they would say, "Oh, unhappy child."
Might be true. Might be true. Although I'd like to warn you that an alcoholic father can produce a son that's an alcoholic or one that will not drink at all. You can get both from the same stimulus, right? All right. Okay, we've looked at some of this. I'm gonna leave these slides with you. I want to venture to this one here. This is the way that you ought to think of the way we are put together in community. And so I'd like to agree with Murray Bowen and Edwin Friedman that we are not isolated individuals. We are actually individuals who've been defined within the context of groups, and multiple groups. Have you ever noticed that you tend to be different people to some degree if you're in a different setting? You're different as a student than you are as a son, than you are as a church member. But still, there's something very much about you, but we do understand that the people around us have a great impact on what we do next. Yeah. And so I want you to imagine this mobile. What happens when I click that? It moves everything else. So changes in a remote part of an organization can have effect on every other member of the organization. We are truly hooked together like that. Have you ever noticed that the New Testament tends to be plural as opposed to singular? English kind of defies this here. Is there, in your language, is there a singular you and a plural you? Or can you tell by reading it and speaking it
Yes,
that you're talking to a group? Well, Greek is like that. English, it washed out. And so if it's translated properly, then the New Testament is largely, it's not my Father, it's our Father. And when Paul says that you need to do something, it is very often you plural. The only time you'll find you singular in Paul is when he's addressing specifically Timothy or Titus. So even the Bible views us as people in community. And so I suspect that most of your culture was more communal than my culture. The New Testament culture was incredibly communal and was built around honor and shame, so that if an individual did something, it brought shame on the community. This was still intact in my culture when I was a child, but it's pretty much largely gone from North American culture. So if you're bringing with you from your background an honor-shame culture, you're dealing with stuff that North Americans probably won't understand quite the way you guys understand it. Is that fair?
Yes, can you brought up how your father is like this? I was gonna say something, but you brought up, this is...
Yeah. Knowing I'm not my father has actually been healthy for me, but in church life when I was a kid, if somebody did something that was kind of a public sin, the church felt it. Now if somebody does a public sin, I'm not even sure it gets brought up.
It's where a body.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is much more consistent with what we have in Scripture.